you know, we still need the stories, whether we read modern novels or not. It's like, you know, we need that connection, whether it's with our elders or with our kids. You know, we pass these stories on as something precious. For me personally, it's probably just the unknown, you know. I've always been drawn more to the unknown and whatever the beyond of normal life. So I would actually go out and look for these. You know, we would go to haunted houses. We would go to haunted areas of the cities. See what was going on, you know? Yeah, now, whatever that comes from, I don't know. But it kept life interesting.
It was almost like an escape.
Definitely an escape. Family life was not a happy life. So that was an escape, definitely.
Hey, welcome to the Floaties for Krakens Podcast. I am your host, Camille Maria Acosta, and it is a brilliant day to be monstrous. The inner machinations of your monstrous minds present the Floaties for Krakens Podcast, Season 3, Episode 15, Beats to Chill To, for the Entities. Statement of Camille Maria Acosta regarding an incredible conversation with none other than the radiant Autumn Orange, aka the Vaughnster monster. Statement begins. Heyyy Cuttles. Oh, that's strange. You think something sounded different about the opening of this episode? I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, perhaps a little archivey? Maybe a little Magnus Archivey? Well, it looks to me like we have a couple of investigators listening into our podcast today, which is perfect, because this episode is celebrating the Magnus Archives. In the words of Rusty Quill Production Company, the Magnus Archives is a weekly horror fiction anthology podcast examining what lurks in the archives of the Magnus Institute, an organization dedicated to researching the esoteric and the weird. Launched in March of 2016, this phenomenal show now has 400 freaking episodes and full of twists, turns, and simply put, some of the best storytelling on the planet. And who better to celebrate and chit-chat about this incredible show than the amazing human being who introduced it to us? Let's give it up for Autumn Orange. Autumn Orange, aka Vaughn, would describe themselves as a charming composer, creative creature, and coffee connoisseur. Growing up, music monsters and their creativity played a crucial role in making them who they are today. Although they have been making music since middle school, their first release as Autumn Orange debuted in January of 2019. Since then, they have released over 200 songs under that moniker and are poised to release more. Their music is most often instrumental and tied to a core narrative or theme. Sometimes it's fan work of the show Critical Role. Critical Role's so awesome. Anyway, other times it's far more broad. You can enjoy their music most places one would stream or purchase it. And don't worry, Cuttlefish, we'll put all of the links in the description below. When not making music, Autumn can be found playing video games, writing, game mastering various TTRPGs, looking for fellow cryptids, or hanging with those they love. they'd like to make a request to dedicate this episode to their grandfather, Don. This is for you, Don. I first had the pleasure of discovering Autumn when Spotify recommended to me one of their freaking badass lo-fi albums titled Cryptids. Yeah, Cryptids. Where, you guessed it, each song is dedicated to an iconic cryptid. Not only are they just unbelievably talented and just a phenomenal artist through and through, but Autumn is one of the nicest humans I have ever met. They care so much about us weirdos, and they are always carving pathways to tell the stories we need through melody. Thanks for being you, Autumn. It is a privilege and a joy to now call you my friend. Oh, and by the way, Autumn is the person to thank for making our introduction all magnified. Thanks, Autumn. Just a quick content warning for this episode. In the following interview, there will be mentions and discussions of mental health difficulties, anxiety, depression, loneliness, health anxiety, near-death experiences, and pure OCD in this episode. Do whatever you need to do to feel safe. Also, this may go without saying, but massive spoiler alert for the Magnus Archives in here, okay? Just a heads up. All right, ladies and cuttlefish, let me introduce to you beats to chill to for the entities. Statement ends. Hi again, Autumn.
Hi, Camille. How's it going?
I'm good. I'm alive and breathing, I think. Like,
That's
That's
the right step. Yeah, we want that. That's
it's
perfect.
A start. How are you, though? How's everything?
We're doing all right. The world's kind of an interesting, scary place, but here we are, and we're making music. We're going on cool interviews and podcasts and just living life.
I feel like, well, first of all, you're absolutely right. The world we're a very interesting place.
Tumultuous times.
Very much so.
Which
Yeah,
are great
totally.
for horror. Yeah,
Totally
absolutely.
Great for horror. Great art is going to come out of this year. I swear it's going to happen.
Absolutely.
And I think we chatted before this, and I think you mentioned, right, that like it's so important to have conversations like this or to make art like this, especially during these times. That's just what needs to happen. That is the calling. That's what has to happen right now.
Absolutely. I think great art is often it's two things that are almost contradictory. It's timeless in that you can apply it to a lot of different times and eras and feelings and or parts of your life even, and yet it still captures a moment in time. It has a reflection of whatever was happening at that time, whether that's personal or culturally or whatever technology is emerging at that time, whatever the climate was. And I think that's really what makes a masterpiece, is it has to tote that line between those two seemingly contradictory things.
I never thought about it that way. That is so true. You're right. Absolutely. Brilliantly said. I never thought about, I mean, like you think about music, right? And it's a hit from, I don't know, the 60s. And you're like, man, this speaks exactly to me, right? Like this, it's as if this artist wrote for me exactly what I'm feeling.
Yeah,
right?
all these, like, what is it, 60s, so 60 years later.
Yeah.
So yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's brilliant, and it's so telling of, I think, your artistry, which I'm very excited to get into. So yeah, speaking of which, let's freaking get into it. Autumn, tell us, who are you? What the heck do you do in this crazy world?
Well, by day, I am Vaughn, and I have a very normal job where I'm fixing computers at a university. But outside of that, I am Autumn Orange. So I've released, oh man, more than about 200 songs under the moniker Autumn Orange. I have a few other sobriquets I go under for different projects and genres, but most prolific under the name Autumn Orange, where I make lo-fi beats and instrumental music primarily. Some of it has singing, but primarily it's instrumental, and it is fan music of both Dungeons and Dragons, all things creepy. Sometimes it's sci-fi. I pull a lot of different inspiration. I have an album that's just about winter time and how that makes me feel. So uh, all of it is written by me, composed by me, and then recorded. I use a lot of different software, and then I mix, produce it. If I'm not doing the album art, I'm paying somebody to do the album art, and then we package and deliver it. So that's who I am. My pronouns are they, them, he, him, with an emphasis on they, them. I prefer being a little bit of a non-binary mess.
That's beautiful. It's a gorgeous, sparkly, amazing, mystical ambient mess, I feel like.
Yes, I know. Oh, and the joke I always tell people is, I use they them pronouns because my gut bacteria also likes the invitation. So, what are we if not one
That is
culmination of many
hilarious.
things? Yeah.
Yeah. That's freaking incredible. Oh my God. Okay. So I have so many questions to ask you.
Please, yeah.
Obviously, that's why you're here. But I really, before we get into the dark and stormy spookiness of everything, I really want to pick your brain about your music, and I want to know what drew you to music in the first place, right? And then like what do you love about music, and then what made you want to be like, I want to do that. I want to create.
Oh man. So I grew up in a musical, or I should say a music appreciating family. It's not like I come from a long family of musicians or anything like that. Just both my parents absolutely loved music. They were listening to a lot of classic rock and that kind of thing. And my dad, he did sing a lot. He has a beautiful voice. I did not inherit that. I think I personally sound like a crow, but that's okay. There's a time and place. There's a time and place for crow screeching. But I was constantly surrounded by this music, and I think it was about middle school. That's about the time you're getting kind of angsty and you're kind of discovering your own taste in music.
Oh yes.
And I remember getting a Walkman, so I had my CD player and my first couple of albums. And I just started getting into it, and I felt this. I feel like I love all art forms, and I think we can find catharsis and understanding in every single art form. But music has this kind of, for me personally, almost spiritual level of connecting with other people, and there's a lot of science to that, right? There's a lot of when folks perform music together, there is this kind of created bond that is really unique. That's why a lot of cultures or religions, singing and dancing are part of those rituals, because they are so binding and connecting, and they help kind of share this abstract sometimes, or sometimes it's very concrete experience. And so music was just one of those things that I was always creative. I did a lot of art growing up, but when I started making music, it was the thing that stuck, and I felt the most expressive with. And so I got into playing guitar, and then I had Fruity Loops, which is this silly little like program for making music.
I haven't heard that in so long. Fruity Loops.
Yep.
Yes.
Fruity Loops. I think it's technically FL Studio now, but
that's so funny.
But yeah, I was making terrible music, and then they say you have to do things a while until you get some talent with it, and that's 100% true. I did not have some like innate gift, right? I made lots of bad music before I started making music that I feel like, oh, okay, this isn't so bad. People will like this.
Yeah, yeah.
But that's kind of the genesis of it. I was, and then I'd just been sticking with it, and I've done a lot of different projects, and it wasn't until this autumn orange lo-fi kind of thing that I found some success. So sometimes you have to try and stick with things for many years. At that point I had been making music since middle school, so that had been maybe 10 years or so.
Yeah.
So
And it came from such a real place. I mean, middle school, God, right? Like tough.
talk
Middle
about
school,
horror. Now
talk
you're getting into the real true creepy. Yeah.
truly just absolutely terrifying. You know what the hell's going on like 9 times out of 10. You don't know what's going on with your body, right? With like your friend group. Do you have friends? Are they not friends? And you're beginning to realize that like your world isn't insular per se, right? Like, oh my god, there's other people here. And choices and like what I can do can impact so much. And that's terrifying, right? Like there's just so much that goes on in middle school that poor little bodies have to take on,
Yep.
And music has just saved, I think, so many of us during those
Absolutely.
times.
I
Like,
mean, that was around the era I'd found like my favorite band at the time, which is like
yes,
My Chemical Romance. So
that's right.
yep. I think I heard
Yeah.
that and I was like, yeah, that's what I want to do. So
Yes.
yeah.
Yes. Gerard Way is just such like an icon of a human.
Oh yeah.
In general, right? Like talk about brilliant horror writer, just brilliant writer in
And
general.
continues to be. I mean, even just I believe he's still using he him pronouns, but I mean
Yeah, yeah.
he's so expressive even to this day with like his fashion and his
Yes.
gender expression and things. And that was a huge
Yes.
influence for me at a time when so I grew up in a really small conservative town, and
Yeah.
you don't always have the uh, dialogue for that, right? You don't have the um, word choice or the understanding yet.
Mm-mm. Mm-mm. And they compose it for you. Like they
Absolutely, yeah,
write it for you and you're like, "Oh, okay, like I can feel this way. It's not bad. It's
yeah,
scary maybe, but it's not bad." And there's such a bravery, I think, with music and like resistance and like resilience, like in any form, any freaking form of music. Just the fact that you own it and it's yours and you choose to love something so deeply and passionately is like so badass. Like that's revolution in and of itself, you know.
yep. Punk rock is how to go. Yep.
Punk rock. Yeah. Well, okay, so for people that may not know,
Hmm.
how would you describe lo-fi music, Autumn?
uh, and it is truly a loaded term in a lot of ways. I mean, at its face value, all lo-fi really stands for is low fidelity, which just
Yep.
means that it's rough around the edges. It's not a highly polished sound. We live in a world where there's a lot of producers and a lot of pop music, and it's there's a lot of time and energy put into it, and it's awesome for what that is.
Yeah.
But I think it's also really awesome that we have this music that kind of embraces the amateurism, the kind of rough, distorted, unmixed edge. Uh, and so that's what lo-fi is at face value. Now, what it has also come to mean is you have these YouTube channels that started blowing up mid 2000s. They were Chilled Cow and a few others like that.
Yes.
And these folks were playing these instrumental like hip hop beats. And hip hop is obviously, at that in this era and our, us growing up,
Yeah,
kind of became the mainstream genre and popular genre
definitely.
outside of pop. And so we have this. I've heard lo-fi described as the millennial answer to ambient music because it has this laid back beat that we enjoy and we're familiar with. But the music itself isn't too distracting, and it kind of fills a room. It's there in the background. It's relaxing. And so that's what lo-fi has come to mean. I think good lo-fi is can both be engaging, and if you stop to listen to it, it's interesting and you like it, but it also can't pull your attention too much because people use lo-fi in their videos or when they're sitting down and studying, as it's most notably known as
Yes.
relaxing beats to chill/study to, right?
Yeah.
So the trick is can it augment someone's focus and not pull it away? And at the same time, if they stop to listen, is there something interesting about it? It isn't boring. Is it, whatever it is. So that's lo-fi, I suppose, in a nutshell. Instrumental music with usually a hip hop beat that fills space. So
That's such a brilliant way of explaining it. Yes, I mean there's so many different components to it, and yet you chill with it, right? Like you relax with it. That's kind of the point. But you're right, like it's such a fine line, I'm sure, that you have to tread as an artist when you're composing, right? It's like, okay, this I have so much into this. There's a story, there's a vision, right? I know where this song is, but I can't make it that obvious, like that distracting, if you will, for the listener, which is, I mean, to be honest, like I love music so much, and like lo-fi is one of my favorite genres. And there are times where like the music is just so awesome and so badass and so story forward that I'm like, well, I'm just listening. I'm not working at anything. I'm just sitting there picturing, right, visualizing the worlds that this music could, I don't know,
embody or like illustrate.
be the
Yeah,
soundtrack
absolutely.
of. Yeah. And yours, I feel like you do that brilliantly. But I have to say, I get excited about your music, and I start thinking and I start brainstorming. I'm like, oh my god, like this could be worlds. This could be, stories and characters, right? And stakes. And like I feel like there's a lot to your music. It makes so much sense that you describe it that way.
I appreciate that. And honestly, and I like that that's the struggle with it, right? I like that it's trying to find the balance between, again, not being engaging and at the same time being engaging, right?
Yeah.
But that's also why I say it's kind of a loaded term. So, when I say I'm a lo-fi artist, I use it more as a pass to get away with maybe not professionally mixing my music. So, I've had people tell me that some of my stuff feels more, like post rock for
Ooh,
them
okay. Yeah.
or what have you, but or cinematic or something like that. And at the end of the day, genre is this awesome thing, and we as humans love to categorize, and I love learning about niche genres, right? Like I'm super obsessed. Like if you tell me like, oh yeah, I'm on pink metal right now, I'm like, what is pink metal? I need to know exactly everything, and I need to know all the parts. But at the same time, you can't let genre like limit your choices, right? There's been plenty of times I've struggled with, oh, is this lo-fi enough? Is this hip hop enough? You know what I mean? And knowing genre and what makes genre work, or the components of it, the elements, is an amazing thing to do, and you should know how the pieces work, but you should be able to also take those pieces and slot them in as you see fit. So it should really serve the art at the end of the day.
Great point. Yes. There's so much pressure, I think, to be in one lane. And why, right? Like what for? Like us as humans, we're not in one freaking lane. Like there's so many different components of us, right? So
right.
That's what makes music interesting and unique. And as you said, this fun, relatable thing that we can all go back to all the time and associate with and identify with, you know? Oh yeah, absolutely. Speaking of which, for my squirrel brain, when you said, right, like I love learning about these niche genres. Have you heard of not stargazing, shoegazing music?
Oh yeah,
That genre?
shoegaze music. Yeah.
I just learned
Is this your
about it.
new obsession?
Yes, I was like, I don't know what this is. I heard about it this week and I was like, that's badass. I didn't know that
Do you know the
existed.
origin of the name?
No,
Okay, so this is an amazing little like anecdote, but
can't wait.
shoegazing, the genre name comes from, in this movement. I think it was started late 80s, mid 90s. It's somewhere in that era.
Yeah.
Um, My Bloody Valentine was kind of one of the first artists who did this.
Yes.
Um, but it's called shoegaze because these skinny guitarist kids would have all these pedals to create all this big sound, and they're just sitting there and they're like stomping on these pedals to like create different textures and sounds.
Yeah.
So they're not looking at the audience, their heads are down looking at
Looking
their
right.
like at their pedals, at their shoes. So it's
That's
and I think
amazing.
part of it too, part of the aesthetic with the music kind of getting drowned out in this wall of sound,
Yeah.
it kind of fits the concept of shoegaze, also like keeping your eyes averted. It's a little bit of a shy, it's a little bit of a
Yeah.
tongue-in-cheek kind of interesting aesthetic. So anyways, yeah,
Yes.
shoegaze is incredible. Right now I think Japan has some of the best shoegaze
Oh,
acts. So highly look, if you just like look Japanese shoegaze, you'll find some incredible artists that way.
fantastic.
Yeah, so great genre
Oh,
to
that's
dive in. You should
amazing.
continue to dive into that
Oh, I
one.
will. That's amazing. That's amazing, and it makes so much sense.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
before that, I was just like, I wonder why it's called that. It's almost very, like you said, shy, almost romantic in a
yeah,
way. Like it's that reverberation and the also a sense of ambience. Like there's, I don't know, it's beautiful. I really
yeah,
like it. I really,
yeah.
really like it. That's so funny.
They really came from this idea of like, what can I create the world's biggest sound from my guitar, right? And so
Yeah.
they just loaded up with like a chain of like 8 pedals of like distortion, reverb, echo, distortion,
Hmm.
reverb, echo, and you get some really cool sounding stuff.
It's so cool. It's so badass. I love it. I love it so much. Can't wait to dive deep now, even more.
Absolutely.
Okay, so music, a big part of
Mhm.
you,
Yeah.
obviously.
Yep.
Um, so how did spookiness come into play? Now, this can be spookiness for you specifically, right? Like, do you remember your first moments with being introduced to horror in any way? And then, how did it mix into musicality for you?
Yeah. So I've always been a fan of horror aesthetics. So growing up, my dad was a big Dungeons and Dragons player,
Yes.
and our house was filled with Dungeons and Dragons books.
Oh,
And
that's awesome.
yeah, and I used to, but I was a kid and I didn't know, but I would flip through these books and here's this collection of monsters, the
Yeah.
monster manual. And so those just like filled my imagination, and that was even pre Pokemon, which obviously was its
Oh,
own. Pocket Monsters was huge. And
forget
like,
about it.
yeah,
Yeah,
that
that's
was
like a
most
whole
of my,
chunk of my brain forever.
yep.
Nothing else is going in there, just Pokemon. That's it.
We have it archived, fit,
Yeah.
locked. Yeah, it's there. But before them, I guess in a way I had my own collection of monsters because I had this monster manual,
Yeah.
and my dad was super into comics and stuff too growing up. It's kind of funny because I think he was a bit of an edgelord back in his high school days. So
That's
I
awesome.
I distinctly remember having like action figures of Spawn, which,
Oh my
as far as like
god.
superheroes go, that's like one of the edgiest ones.
That's
And
awesome.
and so I always had this interest in the dark and that
Yeah.
kind of, but honestly it was really just more aesthetic. It's not like I really watched horror films. I was far too young.
Yeah.
Um but oh, and then I was often my name Vaughn, if not referred to as Autumn. My uncle used to call me the Vaughnster monster. And so, I was kind of this idea of a monster from a very early age.
Yes.
Um,
Adorable.
yeah, no, it was a good name growing up. But yeah, I think it really started with the aesthetic of it.
Yeah.
I'm actually not huge on a lot of horror films. I do love them, and I've grown a taste for them. That came more end of high school, that kind of thing. Most of the time I just thought they were like kind of fun things you did at a sleepover.
Yeah.
I didn't think much beyond like that, and didn't get really into the philosophy of it and the aesthetic and the the deeper aesthetics and understanding. But yeah, it's just, I like how spooky things feel. I like how they look. I like a lot of their media and their video games. And I think, this is fair to say, I think if you have any sense of otherness, regardless of whether that's gender identity or your ethnicity or the, among the friends you even make and find, horror has this huge appeal. And I think at times it resonated with me in ways that I didn't understand at the time. When I think back and I look at some of the monsters and things that I really liked, I was kind of thinking of this earlier today in preparation of knowing we were going to sit down and have a conversation. But it kind of occurred to me even just today that having like a sense of non-binary gender, I really resonate with that kind of unknowing kind of creature. Like we don't think of, well, is that monster a boy or a girl? We don't have time to think of it. It's just this writhing mess of tentacles and eyes and or whatever it is.
Off the bat.
Exactly. And so I think that was kind of my intro to all things creepy. Is it resonated with me on some level. I'm also an anxious individual, and
me too.
Yep. And there was a brilliant video on the film House, which is this beautifully insane Japanese horror film.
Yeah.
And when I say insane, I mean it is bombastic and colors, and it's a beautiful film, very artsy, highly recommend. But I was watching this think piece on it, and they were talking about horror as catharsis. And, when we watch horror films or listen to horror podcasts or whatever, we put a nice frame around this thing that helps us process these deep fears and feelings in a safe way. We've framed it, and we kind of can then get up close to it and inspect it, and even in some ways befriend it or draw power from it. And so I think very quickly any kind of creepy media became that for me.
That's so awesome. I'm first of all very happy. I feel like your dad definitely garnered a sense of like creative freedom in the house, right? Like look at all these magical other worlds that you can be a part of.
Absolutely.
Right? Which is so cool. And so awesome, and I'm so happy that you had that exposure, right? Like at such a young age.
It was critical. I mean, honestly, it's monsters and music are huge for me. So
they are you. That is who Autumn Orange is, right? Monsters and music, in a sense. Absolutely. That's so awesome, and you're so right. I mean, that's why you're so perfect as a guest on this episode. Because all of the things you're talking about and you're questioning in terms of horror, in terms of monstrosity, right? Are so accurate. And the crazy thing about horror, right, is that there is not one way to define it. There are so many different types of what people would consider horror, what people would consider a scary movie. right?
Right.
There, and I'm very like staunch on the fact that there is no definition of it, right? Like, everything's right, right? It encompasses
Yeah.
so much.
Right.
And I love that you said like it feels like you can associate so deeply with it in terms of gender identity.
Mm.
It's so freeing in a sense, but as we'll get into, very complicated, right?
Yeah.
Because unfortunately in a lot of these films, right, and you see a scary movie and you start relating to the monster, it's like, uh-oh, like, am I the bad guy? Right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
am I
Yeah.
the one that has to be defeated at the end? Why? Like, why? That doesn't make any sense,
Yeah.
you know?
Absolutely.
Well,
Yeah, I mean, these are the big scary questions. Yeah.
I know, we're gonna get deeper. Of course we
Okay,
are. Of
let's
course
go.
we are. And I guess before we answer those questions further, right?
Hmm.
Autumn, what do you think is a monster?
Boy, what do I think a monster is, huh? A monster is a reflection of humanity. It's either a reflection of our worst selves, or what Carl Jung would call, our shadow self, our
Oof.
dark desires. Um, Sometimes it is a sense of otherness, and that's where maybe we find that connection to it. The A monster is often defined, it's a title that's put on somebody. Very rarely is a monster claim the title. And if they do, it's usually out of a sense of empowerment, right? It's
Mhm.
because you have othered me. And so now I will embrace
Mhm.
being that other. Um, I think the word, like, and we see that even in like the Latin root, I think it's monstrare, which
Yeah.
is
Yes.
to show or reveal, right?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Um, and so we get this revelation of what it means to be human, either by opposition or by understanding that we ourselves can be put on the other side of whatever the norm is, the what's in power, what's defining humanism, or whatever being a good person is. So
Yeah.
uh so monsters are reflections, they are personifications of, I would say, very interesting things. Obviously, we can think of a monster being a very cruel hearted person, and we don't want relation to that. But, I'm probably beating a dead horse, but also, again,
No.
monster being, I feel othered. So I
Yeah.
understand that role.
And yeah, like I love that you said that there is a sense of almost privilege in who gets to call who a monster, right? Like,
Right. Yeah.
it really changes the context from there. um and
Absolutely.
and you make a great point, right? It's not often that like you'll see a monster in a film and they're like, I'm the monster, here I am, woohoo, right? Like, they are given that title, they are told that that's who they are and that's what they're supposed to be. um and again, you had a great mention too of oftentimes when monsters call themselves that in storylines, right? It's an act of reclamation. It's an act of like, I own this and I'm proud of this and it's powerful. And yes, you should fear me, right?
I think for me, the film of the year for that, like, I loved Wicked. Like, and
Oh my god.
I had actually not watched it.
Wicked.
That was just one element of millennial life I had just completely like skipped over in my life, and
Yes.
then
Yes.
I went to see the movie, and I was like, oh yeah, this is everything now.
It's and granted, I've seen the musical and I've all the things. I haven't seen the new one yet. I actually might be seeing it today.
Oh,
But
exciting!
love, right? Yes, millennial, yes, absolutely. And I mean, that's what the story is, right? Like, that is what encompasses it. It's these differences,
Right,
um that make us so unique and so powerful. And
right,
it can be terrifying to live in this world that is just so seemingly perfect.
yeah,
um you know, it can feel like you mentioned the words, right? Otherizing and ostracizing,
Yes.
and you don't know where you fit in. And that, you know, defying gravity, right? As we all know, right? Cynthia Erivo, just queen of queens, just an amazing human being, just can sing the day is long, right? Like, just
Absolutely. Yeah.
so good. But I think that song, not only is it just so brilliantly written, it's so catchy, and it's just a great chord progression. It's so beautifully, it's just rhythm. I love it. And the words are so empowering. Like, it's like, oh
Yeah.
my God. Right. And like on the stage, right, when they do the stage play in Broadway, right, she lifts off the ground and she's flying, and you're like, oh my God, I can do anything in this freaking world.
I don't know if I could speak to much of it, but I know that there even is, on a subconscious level, there's some similar structure to Over the Rainbow musically. And so on a subconscious level, it even like, yeah, Defying Gravity is stupidly brilliant. Like,
Stupid.
it is just
It's stupid, guys.
it's incredible. Like, I can't remember. I was watching some like breakdown of it, and
Yeah.
this individual was kind of pointing out, you know, all the like little musical ideas and motifs, and I was like, to one day write as deep as that, you know. But
God.
I'm glad I have like constant shifting goalposts to try to meet, though, you know.
Yes, I know. Oh my,
Well.
okay, literally, if you ever wrote a musical, that would be the first Krypton musical. Oh my God, do it, Autumn. I'm telling you right now, we're putting it in this.
I wish I could claim it was the first. There's actually a brilliant one about my local cryptid, the Jersey Devil.
You're right. No, you're right.
Yeah.
And then there's Bat Boy. There's also Bat Boy the musical.
Oh, I haven't heard of Bat Boy.
You're
That sounds
right.
fun. Yeah.
Well, you're gonna make the third one. The third one is the key. It's the charm. It's gonna be so great. It's all lo-fi, by the way. No one's singing anything at all. And it's gonna be revolutionary.
Yeah, everybody just comes to the theater and they bring their books and they study and they there you go.
When I tell you, you'd make millions. You a lot of millennial dollars, but you would make millions, let me tell you.
Oh man.
Oh my gosh. No, but I really love how fluid your definition is. I think there is so many different places to go from there.
Well,
And
I mean, it's kind of like you were saying. I think horror is often immutable, or you know, or monsters just being horror taking shape that can, you know, potentially harm us. So,
yes. And it can be a, you know, as you said, like the reflection aspect, and it can be kind of terrifying to learn about humanity from the side of the monster, right? Like when you identify so deeply with the other.
Yeah.
And so I'm really excited about this episode. This is about to be very fun. I'm excited.
All right.
Okay, so I know that this is a very big a very big world, if you would. I mean, it's incredible. It's layered. There's so much to this world. But before we really get into it, because we are going to be exploring, which I will hope you will also define, right, this idea of cosmic horror. Can you tell us a little bit more about like H.P. Lovecraft and like Lovecraftian horror, and of course like cosmic horror, speaking of all the genres?
Yeah, absolutely. So Lovecraftian horror, actually, you know, as the name implies, comes from H.P. Lovecraft, who is a terrible human being.
Yes.
Irredeemable, a true monster in a lot of senses.
Yes.
You know, luckily did not see a lot of success in his life.
No.
He was penning these unfortunately great stories that, you know, again spoke to the time and place, but they were written by a terrible human being. He was very xenophobic, racist. He was a recluse. And just generally not a great person. But he was coming up with these ideas of Lovecraftian horror or cosmic horror, eldritch horror, the idea or notion that there were these large entities that were all powerful and made us smaller than ants. We were nothing more than flecks of, how we might treat an earthworm on the ground, right?
Yeah.
Or less than.
Yeah.
But that there were these large entities that moved about the universe and cared very little for us, if at all. And at the time, this is the 1920s. Just before that, you had Nietzsche and you had this movement of nihilism, and atheism is becoming a little bit more accepted and in circles, and people are discussing religion and that kind of regard.
Yeah.
And so I think cosmic horror really took off in that era because with all the discoveries mankind was making and this sudden pause on where we fit in the grand scheme of things, there was this horror that I think resonated with people, that maybe we aren't the center of the universe. Maybe we're really not that important. And it's interesting how cosmic horror has shifted, I feel like, in today's world. I think for our generation, that's a lot less where the horror comes from. I think cosmic horror in today's world kind of fits more in a sense of being afraid of what. There's a wonderful YouTuber. His name's, I actually don't know their name, but they go under the YouTube name Tail Foundry.
Ooh,
And
okay.
they have this wonderful video called Cosmic Bliss. And the concept is the horror of today's cosmic horror is this idea of giving up your sense of self into something that's bigger than you, accepting the inevitable, taking on this, like, giving up all your fears. And if in doing so, do you lose some part of yourself? And so I think that's one element of why cosmic horror still resonates today in today's zeitgeist. The other side of it being, I think we're all feeling the pressure of things that feel so far out of our power right now.
Yes.
To get political, because life is political and horror is inherently political.
Oh, absolutely.
We have people in power right now that do not have our best interest. We don't have a lot of avenues to try and stop them, especially on an individual level. We do, I think, as a group, and I hope that we all can kind of collectively find that, whatever that looks like, and we can make that revolution happen. But but I think that's why cosmic horror is going to still resonate with people, is that it is fear of one's insignificance against something that feels so big and so out of our power. The environmental degradation that we have because of everything. It's hard because as an individual, I might not, I bring my canvas bags to the grocery store, but what is that in the grand scheme of things? It's so big.
Totally.
And again, there are ways to overcome that, but we first need to be able to frame that horror, that feeling, and come to terms with it and look at it in a safe way. And so if part of that is reading Lovecraft or any number of other great cosmic horror writers, and the great thing is, folks, is there's a far more diverse group of authors out there who are not problematic pieces of trash human beings.
Oh, yes.
Who are doing phenomenal stuff. And so it's I think that's what cosmic horror is. It's fear of what's so out of our power. It's fear of losing yourself to something bigger than you. It's as the name implies, it's on a gigantic level beyond our comprehension.
Well said. Yes. The loss of control, and that existential dread, that feeling. I mean, there's just so many brilliant components to this specific subgenre. And
Yeah.
it's yes, of course, right, like you do get into the cosmic ideas of it in the world, and these, often alien type, ideas and
Right.
monsters, sure, but like more so it's about like the idea of how small you are,
Yeah.
in this world. And I love that you related it to our current political climate, because I think that is probably the genre that most of us do relate to right now.
Yeah.
Just feeling, like these immense feelings of dread, these immense feelings of I don't know what to do. I can't do anything. I don't feel like anything I'm doing is making much of a difference.
Right.
And it's so profound. I
Mm.
think the fear in Lovecraftian horror and cosmic horror in general, it's such a deep rooted, like, there is something ancient in us that has always feared, right? Like that idea
Yeah.
of being overtaken and that feeling of not, um, almost not mattering, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, I mean, it's so layered. And you're right. I will even in the links below, I will drop a list of authors and other books that you can absolutely read, and explore to learn more about it. But I think you explained it brilliantly. Absolutely.
Oh,
It's
cheers.
it's a sticky.
I think that's what's so exciting is, you know, that Lovecraftian horror, despite it having his name, is being reclaimed
Yes.
by a diverse group of people,
Mhm.
on every level. And the other
Mhm.
side of it, it does touch into sci-fi, which is interesting. So
Yeah.
science fiction, which again is, you've got a lot of philosophy then, and you take these extremes and you kind of look at
Mhm.
them and analyze them. So exciting stuff.
It is exciting. It is exciting. And I really love, like, and I don't even know if like we can consider it a genre or anything, right? But like this idea of like cultural groups reclaiming these narratives and making their
Yes.
own special genre of horror.
Yeah,
It's brilliant. It's so much fun. It's so exciting. Um,
absolutely.
I love people. I love where people can take things. It's so fun. It really is so fun.
Yep.
Okay. Heavy question, big question.
All right, fire away.
What are the Magnus Archives, Autumn? And I know there will be potential spoilers in this episode, maybe, but that's okay. Like, I want you to go in. I want you to tell us exactly what they are and how these stories work. It's in a podcast format. Tell us everything, please.
It's so hard because I'm so vehemently against spoilers, and I'm always telling people, like, I try to like think of the best way to describe something on surface level, but be like, no, you have to go experience this for yourself because it will
Sure.
flip. That said,
Yes.
so heavy spoiler alert, folks. Please go check it out. However, I do think I can kind of touch on it that enough that it will intrigue you and also
Yes.
not be huge spoilers. So,
Iconic.
um, although it'll be difficult to talk around the monster I've chosen without that being a major spoiler. So,
Right.
that said, the Magnus Archives is a podcast distributed by rustyquill.com,
Mhm.
written by Jonathan Sims, directed by Alexander J. Newell. It tells the story of Jonathan Sims, who plays the head archivist at this institute known as the Magnus Institute, located in London. Um, Jonathan has a team of individuals who work with him, and they explore these statements of individuals who have had brushes with the supernatural. And so, as Jonathan reads them, he's categorizing and cataloging them using a tape machine, which is very weird because it takes place in modern times. And
Love
although
it.
there is a reason for that, we'll leave that as a question mark.
Love it.
Um, Beyond that great lo-fi aesthetic.
Which
So it
I'm
all,
sure he was going for.
yep, no, it's all linked together. There's a reason I brought this up.
I love it. I love
But
it.
the Magnus Archives is a podcast. There are 200 episodes, 5 seasons, so that's roughly
Ooh.
40 episodes a season.
Ooh.
Each episode is anywhere between, I think the shortest is about 15 minutes, but they can go up to about a half hour. It's a radio drama. Every episode, or most every episode, can kind of stand on its own, with little overarching stories that kind of happen at the beginning and ending of each episode.
Very
So,
cool.
but as what a standard episode is, they read a statement and they talk about some individual's experience with the supernatural.
Love it. Oh, I love it. I mean, I especially like with my folklore background, I feel like, and
you're a bit of an archivist yourself, so
and I would never, I know people go to school for museums and collections and archives, absolutely, but I went to class with a lot of these people and I work with a lot of these people, and it's just it's so awesome. Like, it's so geeky in the best way. And I don't know, and like I'm even more excited that you said that he uses a tape recorder, because I feel like that's most of the equipment we use all the time still. So
it's
it's great.
Yeah, it's also just very delightfully British in a way.
Oh, I love it.
Jonathan Sims, both the character, but the actual writer and voice actor. I absolutely adore listening to that man talk.
Yeah.
He was also in an amazing video game called Slay the Princess, which is a cosmic horror.
Ooh, okay.
And so, little plug for Slay the Princess. We won't get into it too much, but highly recommend that too, because he's the main voice actor in that one. Well, there's 2 individuals, but fantastic game.
That sounds so cool. Oh my
Yeah.
God. I love it. I love it. I love creatives that just like really tug on your heartstrings, and like, they just make it fun and exciting. They're good at what they do.
Yeah, absolutely.
And even with you just saying, right, that like there's so many freaking episodes in these 5 seasons.
Yeah.
And the fact that like each one almost could stand on its own is just incredible. Like, that is incredible writing, incredible planning, and organization.
Yeah, I think that's the real testament to it. And before we dive, further in, like, with that format, you get this horror anthology, which, kind of means that there's something for everyone.
Yes.
But at the same time, it's really cool when you start to see how all the pieces slot together and how it's all tied together. So, and that's kind of the cosmic side of it too. I mean, both in the horror sense, but that we have this entire anthology that kind of slots together, and how, the big implications there. So
it's a museum collection. It's great. It's so awesome. Like, that's so cool.
It's so cool. They actually just released like a role-playing game system, which is a big hobby for me. So like a tabletop role-playing game system. It's published by Monty Cook. It's called the Magnus Archives TTRPG. But I'm so excited to actually properly run a game. I really enjoy DMing and being that kind of storyteller. Yeah.
That's so cool. Oh, I love that. I'm so excited. Okay. I know. Okay. So my brain's going very fast.
Yes.
Okay. So obviously I know, right, like talking about your monster today, just let alone, it's just a spoiler, probably.
Unfortunately so, and it doesn't come until I think episode 111 or so. So it's about a midway spoiler, yeah.
But it's okay, because I still feel like no matter what, because me included, right? Like, I still wanna listen to this whole thing because it sounds so awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so who are the entities?
The entities are fear themselves. They are fear. They are this abstract concept that lives just outside the peripheral of like our experience or our dimension even. A big part of the Magnus Archives lore is that there are all these strange happenings that these academics start to piece together and realize, oh, there's a common thread through some of these.
Oof.
And there's this character named Robert Smirk. He really is just a name. He's not alive. This is like, he's part of the reason the Magnus Institute was founded in like, I think the 1800s or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
But Smirk did, as an academic, kind of defined these 14 distinct dread powers known as the entities. And each is responsible for a core fear that humanity faces. And what I like about this concept is it both honors like cultural difference and also explains what is so innately human beneath culture and like that shared experience that no matter where you come from or who you are, we share these like core fears.
Yeah.
And so there are 14 entities. I will happily, technically there might be a 15th one, which is a big question mark through
Love it.
the podcast, but I will happily geek out over all 14 very briefly if you'd like.
Yes, please.
Because
Do it.
my favorite question to ask everybody, and I'll give you my answer, but I have to ask you, is what entity is your personal like entity?
Ooh.
Because what happens is these entities, and again, I'll explain them as individuals in a second.
Yeah.
But each one of them creates avatars. These are monsters or people who like do their bidding. And so they act as a patron for select individuals, or they create artifacts that get dropped into the world that cause horror or, you know, issues or whatever it is. And each of these entities has a ritual that is thought to, if the ritual was performed correctly, this entity could pass into our world and shape it in whatever image they want. So these are very cosmic, like abstract, metaphysical beings. And a big reoccurring theme is that through a human psyche or lens, that shapes the entity, but at the same time, there's not a easy understanding. There's not easy language between a person and these abstract beings of, you know, emotional fear, right? So there are 14 of them.
Okay.
There is the flesh.
Already.
The flesh is fear of body. Interestingly enough, there's a great quote in the podcast itself where, when talking about the flesh, the character Gerard Key, who I think reminds me of Gerard Way, so it's incredible.
Oh,
but I don't know if there's a one-to-one, but it makes me think.
You never
of him.
know.
Yeah. But Gerard Key is talking to the main character Jonathan about these entities, and he says something like, "What, you think your fear matters more than any other living thing?" And the flesh is actually one of the youngest fears because it comes from like factory farming and this sense of like beauty standards and things. Like, it's this weird mosh of human body and meat, and maybe we're just made of meat and we're walking around, you know, exhaling our breath at one another. So that's the flesh.
Charming.
There's the slaughter, which is the fear of unpredictable, unmotivated violence, war. It's just this context of, you know, violence and harm being done to you. There's the hunt, which is a fear of being pursued, being stalked, being or being an animal. It is one of the oldest fears because, as you can imagine, for humans, we've been arguably on top of the food chain for a lot of time. So it personifies in a weird way. So anytime the hunt is involved in one of the statements, it can take the form of stalking. They did a very good job and very respectful job of kind of playing on the fears of like police brutality and racial profiling, and the hunt was kind of the entity involved with that. There's an entity called the desolation, also known as the lightless flame, and that's just fear of loss and destruction. You lose, everything you've worked for all of a sudden, and like that. There's the buried, which is fear of claustrophobia, of losing breath. There's the dark, which obviously is one of the oldest fears of what may lie in the dark. There is the lonely, which is the fear of being forsaken, being, that nobody cares. When you kind of hear a story or a statement about the lonely, it's really hard to not project like ideas of mental illness like depression and things like that. So it's it's a particularly nasty fear, and probably the most subtle because sometimes people can get comfortable with the lonely.
Ooh.
Yeah,
I love this.
I mean, this is kind of why I was so excited to talk about this one. Is it encompasses like
so much
horror and exactly how abstract and fluid these things are. Because each of these entities, sometimes it's difficult to tell which entity is behind what occurrence, because they have this bleed over in between. And I have a whole quote for that one too, but I'll leave the rest of the list.
Yes.
But there's the vast, which is fear of wide open spaces, falling heights, the
Makes
deep,
sense.
unknowable ocean, the vast. So there is the corruption, which is your bugs and your rot and your germs and your cults and your toxic sense of what love is. That's the corruption. So there's the I, which is the fear of being watched, the fear of secrets being revealed, paranoia, having to know things. There's the fear of the spiral, which is very Junji Ito-esque.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. But
so there's definitely some crossover there,
love that.
which is another great cosmic horror element, right? But it is the fear of madness. It's the fear of deceit. It's the fear of not being able to trust your own sense and your intuitions and things like that. There is the stranger, which is the fear of the unknown, the uncanny, the unfamiliar, what might look like your friend but doesn't feel right, feels off. Very huge in today's zeitgeist as far as horror goes. So
totally.
And then the last two fears, the end. So the fear of death, that all things will eventually end, and that's the end of it, and there is nothing beyond that. And then the web, which is the fear of manipulation and being controlled. So,
holy crap.
If I can pull a quote from the podcast itself.
Yes, please.
This is a discussion of the entities, but Gerard Key says, I always think it helps to imagine them like colors, the edges bleed together and you can talk about little differences. Oh, that's indigo or that's more lilac, but they're both purple. I mean, I guess there are technically infinite colors, but you group them together into a few big ones. A lot of it's kind of arbitrary. I mean, why is it navy blue and sky blue? Why are they both called blue, but pink is an entirely different color from red? You know, it's just how it works. And like colors, some of these powers, they feed into or balance each other. Some really clash and you can't put them together. I mean, you could see them as just one thing, I guess, but it would be pretty much meaningless, like trying to describe a shirt by talking about the concepts of color. Of course, with these things, it's not like a simple spectrum, it's more like, and then Jonathan interjects, an infinite amorphous blob of terror bleeding out in every direction at once. To which Gerard says, now you're getting it. And then Jonathan Sims says, like colors, but if colors hated me. Got it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly that. That's out of this world, literally. Like, that is so cool.
Yeah.
To create that concept. Just so brilliant. And I think maybe, I know we've been just talking about millennials all day today. Can you blame us? But like, I feel like there is that inherent want to be categorized, right? Or like the obsession with categorization and
yeah.
Right, like talk about the Enneagram, talk about even, right, like our star signs or whatever. Like there is that obsession with like, who are you most like and who do you associate with?
Yeah,
And
no, it's this strange individual but collective. I mean, again, it's paradoxical, kind of like, what makes a masterpiece, both timeless and stuff. Like it's all what group do you fit in, and yet how do you individually like resonate,
yes.
Fascinating.
Ugh. And I am haunted already, just like by their names themselves.
Oh
and
yeah.
Oh man, like you could just tell like how much thought went into creating each of them.
Jonathan Sims, like the person, the writer, phenomenal. And that's why like it, the Magnus Archives, I have a lot of different media I always recommend folks, but
Yeah.
this is like, as far as horror goes, this is like my go-to recommendation.
Yeah.
And it's a hard sell when you tell somebody it's 200 episodes and it's 25 minutes of listening to a British man talk to you. But once you get in, I knew once I had kind of found it, I was hooked. And and it took a bit, but once we started getting into you would start seeing these common threads through the statement, right?
Yeah.
Where it was like, well, that's interesting because the fear here is very related to, one's psyche and their madness and whether they can trust their senses. But then this one over here is like a story of how somebody lost their house to like a fire, and you're like, okay, but you start seeing these patterns.
Right.
And I feel like that's very cosmic horror. That's very Junji Ito,
Yes.
Uzumaki, right? You start
Yes.
seeing these patterns and you're like, well, wait, this statement and this statement 20 episodes later have some kind of related. And the show does an incredible job because certain names will come up again in subtle ways, and you start to like piece together like a crazed detective of, who's responsible for what and what entity they serve if they're an avatar, or what entity is hunting them, because these entities, you could say they're feeding off of an individual's fear. It's a little more abstract only because they are fear itself, so it's more like they're growing in power. But they are all competing with one another too, which is kind of an interesting issue too.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
Can you explain that more?
Absolutely. So some entities are almost at odds, right? So for example, we have the buried and we have the vast. The buried is, you're the center of the universe and everything around you is pushing down on you and crushing you. and the vast is you're nothing in a field of, I think I learned today that there is this thing called prairie madness, where Americans living out in like the prairies and like flatlands, not having any kind of anything to kind of focus on in the distance, can get a bit stir crazy with that, and get depressed or anxious because they don't have anything to kind of fixate their sights on. So
makes sense to me.
yeah. So you could say prairie madness is a machination of the vast, whereas finding yourself on a public, to give you kind of a sense of how the entities create things in our world.
Yeah.
You could say that there's this bus that doesn't feel right, but you have to get the last bus out of the station to get home, and you jump in this bus and it just increasingly swells with people and you're just
completely
tight. Yeah. So they're at odds though. And some of them are competing in ways of each entity, and again, going through human thought, filtered through human thought. They want to come into our world and change it and rule it. And so the people who aren't outright victims of these entities, but are working for them, their avatars, are trying to conduct some kind of ritual to bring that entity into our world. And the first one who gets to our world would rule it.
Gotcha.
So that's kind of where the competition comes from.
Competition on so many different forms. Just
yes.
Ideas, fears.
Yeah. But I mean, it's also fascinating how dependent they are on one another, right? Like,
yes,
you can't have, the dark and the eye are kind of at odds with one another.
Yeah.
But you also need them at the same time to contrast one another. So it's this kind of fascinating problem that the podcast also explores on a bigger story level.
Oh, that's so badass. Like, that is God, I really, really love well-written stuff in general, in any arts capacity, what have you. I love a well-written, well-thought-out character storyline, right, that has layers and digging, and I mean, that is just, it sounds so awesome. It's awesome.
And the Magnus Archives fandom, generally a great fandom, generally, and it's so fascinating reading people's different theories and how things fit together and stuff, and there are people who are doing, I think the fun with the like whole category thing and the entities, right, is like I've seen amazing things where people are like, well, here's outfits inspired by each of the entities, and they do like different cosplays, and it's amazing. So
that's so cool.
Yeah.
Well, do you have well, it's not even a favorite here, right? But I guess, is there one?
Have I been touched by an entity? Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah. I've been chosen, and this is kind of where this is why it's one of my favorite conversations, is talking to people about like, because for me, I think an entity is, again, a big theme for this whole podcast is paradox, right?
Yeah.
Something that you think you could almost pull power and strength from, and at the same time you're deeply afraid of. And to me, that's kind of what makes somebody have a particular entity that they might that they might gravitate towards. For me, I think I gravitate towards the end, which is the fear of death. I had a near-death experience that I woke up one morning and my heart was going double time. And you'd think like maybe normal anxiety, right? But was not the case. I actually, I guess minor health warning for folks, and trigger warning in that regard. So I had this condition called atrial fib, which is the upper chamber of your heart is basically seizing, and it's going faster than it should. Um, the good news is it's not super deadly. In fact, a lot of older folk um, walk around with atrial fib, and that's just a part
Yeah.
of life. For me, I was young, and I had no record of it or history of it. And so I went into the hospital, and they filled me in on this, and it was not converting on its own. So they're like, we're going to put you under, and we're going to convert you. A big part of my own anxiety is health anxiety.
Yeah.
So, which would make you think that my patron might be the corruption. And in a lot of ways, it could still be that.
Yeah.
But
Yes.
so the filth, getting sick, things like that. But I think I was I had to be put under, and then they restarted my heart. And I'm talking to you, so obviously it was successful and good.
Yeah.
But I think anytime you have a near-death experience, it puts this marker in your life of before and after. And there's an incredible artist, Frank Iero of My Chemical Romance. He had a near-death experience too, and he had a quote where it's like, you don't know after the near-death experience if the life you're living is like not some like projection, or you know what I mean, like it
Yes.
segments a part of your life from that point on. And that really resonated with me, that idea. And so, as tried and true as fear of death is, I mean, that's why it's a innate core fear, right? But if you look around my room, I've got, I think up there, I've got like Ouija boards, and I have a tapestry over here that is just of a skeleton, and like I I explore these kind of dark concepts and death, and so I think I draw a certain power from it. And it's in some ways freeing to know that if your worst fear is death, like a lot of other things that you're going to live through feel a lot less of terrifying. So there's a great character in the series named Georgie Barker, who she has a brush with the end. Let me go and fix that again, but
You're fine.
anyways, Georgie Barker has this brush with the end, and the way it touches her is she's actually can't feel fear ever again. She's one of the few humans who, because she has experienced death but come back from it, she's no longer afraid of anything else.
What?
So she's a fascinating character who kind of falls into this story. But yeah, it's so I guess that would be my entity of choice. There's also another character who becomes an avatar of death, and what he does is he dream walks. So when he sleeps at night, he finds himself walking around wherever city he's in, and he sees these black tendrils that reach around and like touch people. And then when he gets up the next morning, he goes to those places and sees that those people have died. So like, that's kind of what it is to be an avatar, or to have an entity that you gravitate towards. So I'm curious what avatar you think, and if you tell me your general fear, I could tell you which I think your avatar would be.
God. Well, okay. Well, first of all, I'm so sorry that happened, because
Oh, thank you.
health anxiety is no joke. I relate to you on a lot of fronts, and I'm so sorry that happened, because it can feel so out of control, and you feel so out of control. And I think I'm so proud of you for embracing and exploring further, right, this concept of death, because that is just another form of exposure that is so hard to do, but like is so badass, right? Like you're reclaiming the monster, right? You're making a reclamation of it. And
Yeah.
I think it's so wonderful. In a creepy, spooky way, right? That you found an association.
I was gonna say
Specifically with that.
I don't think I could promise that I'm any less afraid, but I could
Right.
say that again, and it kind of goes back to what I think and why I think this podcast, your podcast, is brilliant. Is it's a nice framing of it, and again, being able to get close to it and look at it, and analyze it, and I think in some warped way befriend it. Knowing like, okay, this is what I'm afraid of, and I may not be any less afraid, but I could be more courageous in when that time comes, or if that time comes, or whatever fear it might be.
Yeah.
So
it's not going anywhere, so it's like might as well sit with it.
yeah, exactly.
Learn more about it, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I think like for all 15, potentially 15, 14, right, are freaky. I could say all of them and I would be like, yeah, that makes, you know what I mean? Like that's haunting, every single one of them.
Yeah.
And I think there are like a few that I'm like, okay, that's, that would definitely scare me. Like this is scary. But I'm kind of bridging between the spiral and the stranger, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Because so I have pure OCD, right? And so much of pure O, right, is fearing the loss of control so deeply, right?
Yeah.
And like in so many different ways, in so many different facets, and everybody deals with it much differently. Everybody has very different brains. And the thing is, right, like of course, like in that outward idea of spiraling, right, like getting lost in your head and your thoughts and just losing it all is very frightening.
Yeah.
But oftentimes there is a certain, when you're really in the thick of it, and again, everybody's different, but when you are really into a rumination cycle and you can't really break free, there is almost this detachment, this disassociation, right? Like this feeling where you don't know who you are anymore. And that's why, like, one of my biggest fears is a doppelganger, right? Like this idea of not like who am I? Who are you? Like who what is happening? Like I have no control over that. And so I don't know if those two are the right category, but those two definitely feel very
I can definitely see why you would be stuck between those two. Yeah, I mean that's fascinating. The spiral and the stranger. I think the stranger has one of the coolest aesthetics because you've got as you get familiar with the podcast, they're circus, they're dolls, they are mannequins.
I hate clowns too, okay, Autumn? Let's just put it out there, all right? Like all those creepy things, like fascinating, but it's very scary.
Absolutely terrifying. But the spiral is, I mean, how terrifying is it that you have, like, you can't even trust your own vision, your own feelings, your own reality.
Yes.
They each of the entities have multiple names, and the spiral is also known as the distortion. So and that's kind of the thing. To the whole point of the entities is there's a lot of bleed over and stuff, right? Like, the end comes no matter what. But I'm also very much terrified if the end was a painful one, and that would be a fear of the slaughter. So it's a very abstract, interesting conversation talking to people. maybe not the most popular way to have a dinner party. You know, what's your greatest fear? And so
I think so. I'd much rather know that than your Enneagram, I think, at this
yeah,
point.
there you go.
Like, I'll still want to ask your Enneagram, but like this is this is way, way more spooky and vulnerable.
Yeah, and it's like you were saying with, like, you know, the zodiac and stuff. It's like, I want to know your avatar,
Who are
your
what
entity. Yeah,
when you
yeah.
turn off the lights at night, what do you picture? What don't you picture? What
What
are
dark
you
power
scared
is
of?
whispering to you? Yeah.
I mean, and it makes you think, like, God, I mean, just with you describe, which you described them brilliantly each, right, in mere seconds, right? I mean, how long did it take them to really build off of all of these fears? Because they all feel so personal, and right, like they identified somebody, right, and they were like, oh, their fear is this for sure. We have to make a character around it. We have to make a storyline around it. And I think that's so cool, like haunting,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know?
No, it's really fascinating. And again, I mean, again, I cannot overstate the brilliance of, like, Jonathan Sims, and the kudos there,
Yeah.
for taking the moment to look for those, through lines for fears that are across the, different cultures and spectrums and things, and then to have the brilliant idea of, like, well, we can create an anthology of it where we have this, tired British man reading
Yeah,
statements because he's trying to categorize things on a tape machine. Um, it, and it gets into more radio drama. There's more,
I
it's
love it.
more than just that. But um, yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. Um, yeah, I mean, and that's why I say, and why I tell everybody, it's like, it is cosmic horror done right.
Yeah.
Um, I think, obviously Lovecraft's legacy is secured in that we call it Lovecraftian horror,
Yeah.
but it makes sense that, Cthulhu has kind of been reduced to, a plushie.
Yeah.
It's a great creature in concept, but the, I think when we think of these things that are beyond our comprehension, you have to talk about it in the abstract, and you have to talk
Yes.
about it in the metaphysical way. And, um,
Yeah.
they really can't take shape, because as big as cosmic horror is, it is still personalized through whatever filter you're viewing it. It still finds the shape that's worse to you. So
Ugh, that was the most brilliant and worst quote, I think, of this whole of this whole episode. It will find you no matter how small you think you are,
yeah.
right? Like that. Ooh, that's no. No, yes, all of the things. All the things. Okay, well, a couple more questions, unfortunately.
Sure,
Autumn,
sure.
I know we could talk about this for
Oh, I'm
months
having a
and
good
months and
time. So
months.
you just keep asking. Yeah.
Okay. So, okay. I know you made a good point, right? That like they don't necessarily, in your opinion, feed off of fear per se when they are fear, right?
Mhm.
That's who they are. They swell with it, they grow with it, right?
Yeah.
But there have been so many iconic monsters in pop culture and storytelling, in folklore, right, that like specifically feed off of fear. Like that's their existence. That's how they
Right.
work, right? And I mean, why do you think, right, that I don't know if you would call it a trope or a motif, right? Why do you think that is so popular in the horror story, right? Is something feeding off of your fear or growing because of your fear?
I think it's obviously not infinite, but it is such a perpetual resource that can be pulled out of you and is absolute dread, right? I mean, being held at knife point is nothing but anticipation for what that might feel like, and the fear of, but once harm comes your way, or the end takes you, that's the end, right? Or again, even if you survive the experience, the experience itself is brief, fleeting, and it hurts, and there's a physicality to it.
Sure.
But fear and then the trauma of after the experience are a long game. They're perpetual. They are, harm is, again, often brief, or it comes and goes and ebbs and flows, but fear is a constant. It's always there. And when it can't be pulled out of you anymore, these entities, and whether that's the entities themselves or Pennywise or any number of, great monsters that drink in one's fear, they can find the next person. Fear is, as an emotion too, is just, it's so consuming. Anybody who struggles with anxiety can tell you, like, I wish it were as easy as, oh, I just won't worry, but I'm gonna worry. And, and even if I do my best to suppress it, it's still right there on the peripheral. And I think that's what fear is it's this constant resource, and in life and in humans, especially humans, that survival instinct is there to keep us alive. But in today's world, where there's all these nuances and things like that, I mean, it's just this vast resource that they can pull from, in that you have to sit through as they pull it from you. It's terrifying.
It's diabolical.
It's diabolical.
God.
Because if you embrace the idea of, like, well, you now don't feel fear, that person, although can be an interesting character, much in the case of Georgie Barker in the Magnus Archives, the stakes are so much different for that individual and less. And then it becomes just generally avoiding harm, which is going to slow you down or not feel good, but there's no terror there. And I think terror is such a big part of the human experience. So
it is. I mean, it reminds you why you're alive. It reminds you about these special little things that we take for granted, right? I mean, but again, it's a double-edged sword, as you said, right? Like, it's so heavy and complicated and layered, yet everybody across borders, across ethnicities, right, cross-culturally, we all feel fear. That is something we have experienced. That is something that we will experience. Like, it is just a universal feeling. And like, the entities will never go hungry, right? Like, they are fine. They are good to go. They can live, which I think again adds to that cosmic sort of vibe, right? Like, they're gonna be here forever, baby. They will be here forever.
There until fear isn't felt, and we know that isn't going to happen anytime soon. So
no, it is not.
Yeah.
Truly terrifying.
Absolutely.
Well, Autumn, why do you think that, specifically the entities have been so fascinating for you, right? Like, why do you keep getting drawn to them? Why have they made such an impact on you in your life?
Back on the subject of categorizing, I feel like categorizing is a sense of control, right? Or it's some acknowledgement, right? And so if you're an anxious person, being able to create these things that you can kind of anticipate, or you have a shape for them, it is empowering, right? If I were feeling afraid of something, it's nice to be like, oh, the eye is the one that's, they're enacting something right now that is causing me this fear because they need to feed on it, you know.
Yeah.
But I also just, again, I love how the cosmic side of it, I love how big it is, that it crosses all kinds of genres and experiences, and kind of boils it down to, yeah, this is something that everybody can feel and fear and relate to, you know.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any one of the 14 fears that I don't, at least at one point in my life, haven't been afraid of, you know. And I think that's kind of also the brilliance of it as well. Yeah. I think that's why, I mean, it's just brilliant writing, and the aesthetics are really cool, and I love the categorization of it, and yeah.
It's all,
And like I said, I love watching TikToks where somebody is like, and I make a cosplay of all the entities or whatever.
It's super marketable. Like,
yeah, exactly.
so relatable. Yeah. I mean, that's what good storytelling does. I mean, it can be reached on all facets, and it can be explored in so many different ways.
Absolutely.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
It makes sense.
Yep.
Well, do you think that the entities are monsters?
I think they create monsters. I don't think they themselves are. They are, unfortunately, they are more of a fact of life. You know, the entities are as inevitable as we've kind of explored death. You know, they are always going to be present because fear is always present. So what happens then is either innocent folks, or often poorly intentioned individuals who are seeking power, or they are seeking to harm others. They are called to these entities and find power in them, and then they use those powers that are bequeathed upon them to enact whatever terrible things they're trying to do, or in turn they lose a sense of self to that cosmic bliss, and they embrace that entity, and they try to bring that entity into our world in hopes that they themselves will be protected in doing so. Which is this great theme of monsters in general. So, are you othered unfairly, or are you choosing to other yourself in a way that's empowering to you, but to harm others? Again, we have this definition of monsters and as a reflection of humanity, and it's unfortunately very human to have our petty moments where we want to inflict harm, or we want to protect what's ours, and unfortunately for some folks that's their main driving point. It's really how we choose to act on it, right? But I think the entities offer an aesthetic, they offer a power to individuals who are mean to do harm. So
well said. Again, so many layers. So many layers. Not so easy. It's not so easy.
Yep.
Well, why do you think monsters are so important, Autumn? Why should we talk about them?
Oh man, monsters are crucial because they lurk in our imaginations, and again, they act as reflections of either who we're afraid of becoming, or who we might have deep down, or they're a sense of strength. They're a sense of being able to process being othered for some reason, whether you didn't fit in this situation, or you don't fit into this neat little category. Being a non-binary individual, especially in this kind of climate, like it's empowering to embrace Vaughnster monster, right? Because it is this, it's nice to be outside of certain definitions, fit set by people who are in power, and they decide who's good and bad or what have you. So, monsters, again, it's paradoxical, but they either help reflect something true in ourselves, or they reflect something true in ourselves that we don't want to embrace. We don't want to bring harm to other people.
Right.
So,
Both valuable
yes,
lessons,
absolutely. Yeah.
Well, we're at our last question, sadly.
Okay.
Unfortunately, we're
Well, we
here.
might have to have a sequel, especially after you catch up on all 200 episodes.
Yes, we will. Oh, yes, that would be so fun. Okay, yes, put that on the calendar. That's what we're going to be doing in the near future, so be on the lookout for that, everybody.
I'll just ask you questions then.
Yes, it'll be fun. It'll be a Uno reverse.
Yeah, there we go. Perfect.
Okay, so say you're chilling, maybe you're relaxing on this Saturday afternoon. Everything,
Sure.
the snowstorm's coming, all the things.
Yeah.
And in whatever way you see fit, whatever avatar, however, right, the end, right, makes their way to you. Whether that is like revealing to you or however you want to, write it.
Yeah.
What would you do in that situation? How would you react? What would you say?
Well, that's such an interesting question. The manifestation of death itself, the fear of death itself, has approached me in the living room.
Correct.
If it is from a point of fear, I think much against what probably the lesson is in understanding the end, I would probably want more time, and so I would barter for more time.
Yeah.
However, if it came to me out of a point of power, I think I'd have to think long and hard, because I don't know if I want the decision of when people die or don't die. But I would also be denying, any sense of dark human self if I said there aren't times that I wish I had that power, especially when we're facing a world that, again, we don't feel like we have a lot of power in. So, I guess I would start with, what are your intentions in my living room?
How did you get in here? That is the first question.
Pretty much, yes.
Yeah. Well, no, I think that's a wonderful way to react, a very human way to react, right? And I think it makes sense that you would want to ask for more time.
Yeah.
I think that how else do you approach that situation, right? And that's in itself a rebellion, I think.
Yeah.
To be able to say, in spite of you, right? In spite of knowing you're here and knowing that you're coming, like, I want to live. Like, I'm not going to let you rule, this life that I have. So I think it makes a lot of sense that you would say that, Autumn.
Yeah, nothing is guaranteed and nothing is promised, but and so there's a lot of strength in acknowledging that the end will come eventually. Hopefully not for a long time, but you do what you can with the time that's given to you, and you try to make good art, and you go on cool podcasts, and you kiss people you find attractive, if that's your thing, and and if you play music, and you play video games, and you try to do good by other people, and but you'll always want a little bit more, and I think that's so painfully human. And that's what keeps the end fed, I suppose.
I know they're hungry and eating right now.
Yep.
This whole episode, they're listening to this episode. They're probably listening to the whole podcast, eating a lot.
Yes, as a final tidbit, I will say that the end is the most inactive of the entities, because it knows it will always win at the end of the day. So,
boom, mic drop.
And what a great way to end the episode. No,
bum bum. Well, I couldn't have said it better as we approach the end of this episode. Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself.
See, we knew it was inevitable, but it
We
had
knew
to
it
happen.
was. Yeah. Autumn, thank you so much for being on
This
the
was an
show.
absolute pleasure. I was just completely honored and that I got the invite. So thank you for reaching out. Having a second to catch up on a little bit of your podcast. Brilliant work, folks. So if you're listening, you're in the right place. And if you're not listening, you should listen, but I don't know how you're going to get that message, but I'll spread the word the best way I can. So
Oh, thank you so much. That's so kind. And like literally, obviously we're going to be linking all of Autumn's work down below. It's amazing. All of it is so fantastic. Whatever you want to be doing, if you want to be studying, if maybe you're writing your own tabletop role-playing game, maybe if you're reading, right? Like whatever it is that you're doing in your busy, busy lives, have Autumn Orange backtrack your life. It's
yeah.
going to be awesome. It's
If
brilliant.
you're not listening to me, listen to Floaties for Krakens and/or the Magnus Archives. So
Yes, all of the things. Listen to
Yes.
every single one.
Your Spotify should be going 24/7 at this point.
24 crazy, just all the things, right? Like my goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah. This episode of Floaties for Krakens was written and recorded by me, Camille Maria Acosta. A monstrous thank you to Autumn Orange, aka the Vaughnster Monster, for such a delightful interview, and for a stellar audio creation in our introduction. A big thank you to Michael Kosman for producing a magnificent episode, and a huge thank you to Natalie Hedberg for designing such a phenomenal logo. And music for the show was also written and produced by me, with a special appearance by my tata, Toby Acosta. Thank you all so much for tuning into today's show. It truly means everything. If you have questions or curiosities about the research or media referenced in today's episode, everything will hopefully be in the description box. And you can find us on our website and our socials, links in the description as well. Anyway, thanks again for being here, everyone. And just a reminder, it's okay to be afraid of the monster, but it's also okay to love the heck out of it too. Keep being monstrous and keep shining bright.